Hello Kindred Longevity Lifestyle Designers, this is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com, and this is the third installment of my series on longevity cultures around the world. And I wanted to clarify something, and this is just sort of an add-on of the previous info I talked about. I wanted to sort of give my take on everything I've talked about. I mean, I've discussed some of the similarities between all these cultures, and I just wanted to let you know what I personally incorporate into my life and what I hold as being quite true in some sense, and then also talk about some of the things that aren't as valid in terms of health but just happen to be out there in all these different cultures. So I do think we have to keep in mind that these are just cultures that are living an example, and they're not perfect. And I talk about 4 different things we should take into account whenever disseminating and taking in new health information. I think it's a great sort of mental system to keep in mind, or mental checklist, just so that we know if we're leaning to or emphasizing one of these categories too much and taking in health advice that might not be optimal. So the first one would be scientific research. So this would be your typical studies on different health things, like, you know, studies on cholesterol, like really the mainstream stuff you hear about in mainstream media, which to a certain extent can have some validity, but to another extent we have done other research in other areas and it might not be as valid as we think, because we're looking at a broader spectrum of perspectives. So yes, there's the research, scientific perspective. There is the perspective of traditional or primitive cultures, which is exactly what we're doing in the last 2 videos with looking at these different cultures. And then there's your personal experience with a specific health practice or food or philosophy around health. Then of course there's also the intuitive approach. So this is like your opinion about something before you've even done it. So some people might look to wheatgrass, for instance, and think, oh, that's ridiculous, humans aren't made to consume grass, etc., etc. Yet many people who have experienced miraculous healing and continue to use it on a daily basis without problems. Some people do have problems with it, and in that case they should just use something else. But the intuitive approach on its own doesn't work, but when you incorporate all these into one, in my opinion, it's a great perspective on health matters. So if we apply that to what the last 2 videos I just made, at least from my own opinion and perspective, I would say that some of the stuff around the diet is what I'm going to focus on at first. Then I'll talk about some of the other lifestyle stuff. But yeah, predominantly plant-based diet I think is just no-brainer in terms of long-term health. There really is no evidence of high meat-consuming cultures or even people living a long time. Across the board, it's always predominantly a plant-based diet. And this is repeated through Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, and all these ancient systems, which might not be termed as scientific, but they are anthropological evidence, and they do make sense. They're very logical in what they discuss. Now, my personal diet at the moment is 100% raw. If we could ascribe a number to it, I do consume some cooked teas, so maybe I'm not 100%, but the idea that these cultures, there's no raw food in them, so we should be eating cooked food, I think is false. We can take that as an example, but it's not dogma. It's not saying because they all eat this way we have to adopt that 100%. In fact, all of these cultures do actually consume a certain portion of their diet raw, which is different from some primitive cultures that consume a lot more food cooked. For example, the Hunzas in Pakistan, and actually the 3 cultures that I mentioned that Dr. Alexander Leaf looked at, the Hunzas, the Vilcabambans of Ecuador, and the people from the Caucasus region of Russia in the mountains there, they all had quite a lot of raw food in their diet, and specifically the Caucasus people of Russia, they would consume raw vegetables, and that was they actually noticed that it was the optimal way to consume them, and they would only blanch them a little bit in the winter. Now the Vilcabambas of Ecuador definitely had the most predominant amount of their diet as raw food. You know, they were eating raw fruit, raw vegetables. I don't know about the grain. Obviously they were cooking the grain. But actually, to talk about the Hunzas on one of the other cultures, they had a bread that was really sun-baked. They had solar ovens that they would create, but there were some instances, I think, where that probably did reach a higher temperature. But it's very low temperature bread, and they actually did sprout the grains, and they did consume sprouted beans. They would actually sprout beans on rocks. And that's a really interesting phenomenon because a lot of people say sprouting is unnatural, even though there's plenty of evidence that people did sprout in the past, they did ferment in the past, and they did consume, the young tender greens, which is basically like a sprout. It's the sprout of the green. And that really is the most nutrient-dense green foods we can incorporate into our diet. And so my personal diet is 100% raw right now because that's what's working for me. It's what I perceive to be optimal, and you can make that choice yourself. I do recommend no more than 25% of your diet as cooked, and if you go beyond that, there can be what's known as leukocytosis, which is the onrush of blood cells to the digestive system because of all the toxins that are created, no matter whether the food's a carbohydrate-dominant food, a protein-dominant food, or a fat-dominant food. There are indigestible components created that your body has to fight off and remove via the immune system, which takes up energy and resources in your body. Now, the reason for traditional cultures consuming some cooked food, or more than that, is beyond the scope of this video, but I would like to talk about that at a further date. Now, another factor is the consumption of animal products, and I do stand by the idea that around 5 to 10% is the optimal amount in terms of your animal product consumption. Whether that's going to stay the same, I don't know. I can't predict my own personal future at this point. And I do enjoy some vegetarian-based animal products, so eggs, dairy, as long as it's raw, and other parts of animals that don't involve killing the animal in certain situations. The idea that we need to be completely vegan personally doesn't have any basis from my observation. There isn't really too much harm from certain animal products that bring to the table unique nutrient factors that we can incorporate into our diet. I personally don't choose to consume meat. Some of these cultures did, but they consume it like once a week or once a month, or if they consume it more than once a week, it's in very small portions, like 2 to 4 ounces at a time. And that's kind of in accord with Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. They don't recommend more than 2 to 4 ounces of meat at a time. And they would always be mixed with spices to help digest it and remove the toxins created in the body from the consumption of animal flesh. So that is definitely a very personal opinion if you choose to consume the flesh of an animal, but I think that can be met with all its needs without the consumption of dead animals. Now, in terms of the other lifestyle factors, I definitely wholeheartedly would embrace any of them, except for the fact that I'm not a farmer, so I'm not working in a field all day. I do other types of exercises, body weight training, anything that really builds long-term strength, not just sort of like flashy strength, but actual functional strength, you could call it, which is what a lot of these cultures had going for them, due to their very active lifestyles that incorporated movements, lifting heavy objects, farming, gardening, etc., etc. Now, I live in a pretty good city. It's a very green, conscious, eco-friendly city. It's a small city. It's not like Toronto. I'm outside of Toronto. I'm in a smaller city. But not the optimal place I want to live forever. I am very attracted to mountains, and a lot of these cultures live in very hilly, almost mountainous areas. So that brings in the aspect of negative ions in the air and very pure, clean air. And that's something I look forward to in my future. And I have plans to do that. And I think that should be a part of everyone's long-term goals, is to, if you want to create the life you want and the health you want that's optimal, you want to be living in a place that's going to support that. And the best places really are mountainous areas or areas near running water, not necessarily the ocean. The ocean can be good, but places where there's an abundance of negative ions. I'll talk about that in a future video too, air quality and negative ions, and there's a whole interesting thing to look at there. So basically, yeah, these cultures that I discussed in the previous 2 videos and that I'll discuss individually in future videos to give you a better idea of their individual lifestyles, there's a lot of aspects from them that I personally take into my life, and that's why I wanted to share these things with you. And you can take whatever information you like from it and make it your own. And with that, I'll say take care, I'll talk to you next time, and embrace life without limits.